home to. You'd be so nice by the fire, while the breeze on high sings a lullaby. You'd be all that I could desire, under stars chilled by the winter, under an August moon burning above. You'd be so nice, you'd be paradise to come home to and love. You'd be so nice by the fire, while the breeze on high sang a lullaby. You'd be all that I could desire, under stars chilled by the winter, under an August moon burning above. You'd be so you'd be paradise to come home to and love, to come home to and love, to come home to and love.
Thank you. Welcome to the another session from the Omagh Jazz and Big Band Festival. That was, of course, You'll Be So Nice to Come Home To. And Gerda, we're going to continue with, just remind me, Gerda, what we're going to
Cast Your Fate to the Wind.
Oh, of course. 1, 2, 3.
A month of nights, a year of days, October's drifting into May's. You set your sail when the tide comes in, and you cast your fate to the wind. You shift your course along the breeze, won't sail upwind on memories. The empty sky is your best friend, and you just cast your fate to the wind. That time has such a way of changing So now you're wise, you're smart, you're old, you're just a man with half a brain. You wonder how it might have been if you just cast your fate to the wind.
We're going to feature the fabulous Paul Maguire now in Sugar.
What are you doing for the rest of your life? North and south and east and west of your life. I have only one request of your life, that you spend it all with me. All the seasons and the times of your days, all the nickels and the dimes of your days. Let the reasons and the rhymes of your days all begin and end with me. I want to see your face in every kind of light, in fields of gold and forests of the night. And when you stand before the candles on your cake, oh, let me be the one to hear the silent wish you make. Those tomorrows waiting deep in your eyes, in a world of love you keep in your eyes. I'll awaken what's asleep in your eyes. It may take a kiss or two. Through all of my life, summer, winter, spring, and fall of my life, all I ever will recall of my life is all of my life with you. break a kiss or two. Through all of my life, summer, winter, spring, and fall of my life, all I ever will recall of my life is all of my life with you.
This afternoon we're delighted to have with us Linley Hamilton, who is a man of many hats: jazz trumpeter, engineer, radio presenter, sideman, frontman, promoter and recording artist. So Linley, you've been a stalwart of the Irish jazz scene and the UK jazz scene for a number of years now, and I was taken by the title of your 2014 album, In Transition, because it's not just the album title, but refers to an entire process which you had gone through and perhaps are still going through in relation to your own playing. A very almost unique example of someone doing an analysis of their own development as a jazz musician.
Yeah.
So, am I right in saying that really what you were trying to effect was a transition from a more horizontal type of playing to a more vertical approach to improvisation? And feel free to expand on that or contradict me or do whatever is necessary.
Well, great. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. I'm a big fan of jazz happening outside cities. I think it's one of those jazz dialects where we get a chance to develop from the socialization that we've had as players. And so whenever people, come from a place like this, they've obviously been exposed to other listening in a live experience, and it makes them play differently. And I celebrate that. I think that's really great. Yes, In Transition was the last album that I recorded at the end of a PhD. So I did a doctorate in jazz performance, which is about 4 years. And we had about 4 or 5 hours of audio to do, 3 albums and different things, and a big write-up and analysis. So analysis is correct, and that was the last album. Since the first album I did was tailor-made in that process. And since 2011, where Tailor Made was, I've transcribed every solo I've ever done on record. So I think it's my 6th studio album now. And so In Transition was correctly, as you identify, a transition from what my playing was before I studied jazz to the level of a doctorate. Whenever I was approaching it widely, and not examining it in a narrow focus or narrow area of focus. So my area of focus for the PhD was how to superimpose. So if we think of, you said horizontal, so if we think of the narrative of a solo, maybe over 64 bars or whatever it happens to be, twice round a form, you'll have these blocks of key centers where the chords are carefully crafted. So you may be playing 4 bars of A minor and 4 bars of C and 6 bars of G and 2 bars of A minor again or whatever. And we have what those are called those keys of the moment, where if the punters are listening to the music, they hear there's a change, but they're not exactly sure what's going on. And the secret of the soloist is to hide that change by playing lines through that change, so that instead of you having a solo where your line is 6 bars long and then a line is 2 bars long, you're disguising that key of the moment. But the key of the moment is a horizontal center because you've got 6 bars of A minor. So in theory, you have 6 bars where you can play the language or the note choices of A minor. But of course, we have what's called strong and weak harmony. So strong harmony is where chord tones are the feature on a downbeat. Weak harmony is maybe where something like a no-no note, as we affectionately refer to, like the 11 or the 4 of a major scale, falls on a downbeat, which is not really something that's strong. So whenever you're playing horizontally, there's a tendency, unless your ear is secure enough or unless you know enough harmony to fix something, where you will land on something that weakens the message, let's say that. So the transition to a vertical language is where, let's say, you have 2 chord changes per bar or 1 chord change per bar. Then you're playing vertically strongly on that language. Now, we've all heard the term being a lyrical player. And being a lyrical player to me is playing musical sentences. So if you think of the construction of a really good paragraph, and let's say you read very advanced books and you're really into your reading, and you see all these sentences of different lengths, and some with just 2 or 3 words and a full stop, and some with maybe 5 comment sections all of different length, and you sit and you think that writing is really great. Well, then that's what you're listening to with a lyrical player. They're playing that's your sentence, a couple of wee comment sections of different lengths and little motifs going through them. So if you're a lyrical player like I was, and I was kind of happy with my playing.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest there, because 'cause I've heard you over the years.
Yeah.
And most people, if they said, would you like to play like that? You'd say, absolutely, please and thank you.
Yeah.
So what element of it were you dissatisfied with? Did you just become fascinated with another style, or were you...
I learned the horrible truth that what I was doing was limiting me to a particular type of music, which was what we would affectionately refer to as the Great American Songbook, jazz standards, where you have these ABAC or AABA kind of forms, and you know you're internalizing. You're getting so used to hearing the oral centers that you can almost play by ear immediately, and you'll be fine. Whenever you get into the transcription process, you discover the horrible truth that you're doing quite a lot of stuff very similarly most of the time. And if you transcribe this, which means, guys, you know, writing it out, you know, like a notation, because obviously if you're playing in time and you're playing subdivisions of the beat, which we do whenever we're reading music, then if we're doing that whenever we're soloing, you can obviously write it out. And if you write it out, you can have the chords written above it, and you can know what the scales are: D7, D, F sharp, A, C, you know, E, G, B, and you can have a look and you can put numbers and you can say, oh gosh, okay, I played a flat 9 there. Now, I didn't mean to, because I was playing by ear, I wasn't thinking. But that's a tension note, so that's outside. Did I resolve it? No, in fact, I played the G on downbeat 1, you know, and you're realizing what you're doing isn't really grammatically correct. A bit like saying, you know, I like Liverpool, they're my favourite team, they kick the ball and occasionally score. You know, you wouldn't say that. You'd be happy with Liverpool, or former European champions, 6 times winners of the cup, with club managing. You'd be using a much more correct kind of language. And I was kind of saying, you know, Liverpool are good and they play football. I was looking at my language and I was thinking, this is quite basic, you know. I'm not using any tension devices. There's all of these things that exist: triad, pairs, altered substitutions, all of that stuff that exists, and I'm not playing it.
Well, were you aware of these things, or did you just know that there were these, that there must be a way of introducing these mechanisms when you're playing?
I've always been a good listener, so I've always been real big fans, and I listened to Chet Baker and Clifford Brown whenever I was quite young, and I ended up playing quite like them. My favourite trumpet player for a long time was Freddie Hubbard, and I've done a recording of one of his tunes, which I'm really pleased of, on that Making of the Arrangements album. I think it was that one. And I'm kind of, you know, I knew that Hubbard was doing stuff that I couldn't do, but obviously Mam's a beast, you know. But there was language that he was using that was sounding out to the ear.
Yes.
And I was thinking, I'm not really sure what that is, but obviously whenever you're doing a 3 or 4 year PhD, you get time to transcribe that stuff, and you're starting to look. And what he was really doing was playing, you know, oral substitutions of altered dominance and things like that. And we think of how music works, you know, and sometimes we think, well, those classical guys do it their way and us jazzers do it our way, you know. And of course that's not true. We all do it the same way. They're using the same language as we are. And, you know, if we're thinking of what we would describe in jazz as tension and release, then we're looking at dominant, subdominant and tonic function in classical music. Well, of course, dominant and tonic and subdominant function exists in jazz, and it existed in blues. And if we think of our evolution of the process from rural blues to early blues to ragtime to Dixieland, or traditional jazz if you want to call it, through the swing processes and things like that until Be Bop happened. Whenever Be Bop happened, the language changed. For a start, there was 8-note scales, and for a start, the chords were clustered much closer together, and then this vertical harmony started to happen.
The 8-note scale, if you can just, people who
Sorry,
aren't familiar with that.
Okay,
Yeah,
so the Be Bop scale introduces chromaticism, which didn't really have a place in jazz to any extent. It certainly wasn't a plan for the jazz that was happening up until Be Bop really came out. And I'll just spend a minute talking about that, actually, if you don't mind, because it's very interesting. So basically, you'd add, a semitone between the 5 and the 6, or even between the 7 and the root, so the flat 7 and the root. So you'd have, an 8-note scale. And the reason you'd have that 8-note scale is so that you would stay on the downbeats. Yes. So instead of playing be-ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo, say playing 7 quavers, you're going to end up closer to being on a chord tone on a downbeat if you're having an 8-note scale and you're playing loads of quavers or semi-quavers, which is what the Be Boppers did, or this other little trick, which was this quaver, or depending on the speed, quaver or semi-quaver triplet thing, which is also what they did. So they had that kind of language that was going on, and it was horrifically difficult, but it's really exciting because this is what happened, and people maybe don't know this. Obviously, they know that in 1939 there was World War II, and Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie were playing in these bands just before that time and through that time that were much more. There were large ensembles with short form solo sections. Now they were starting to take it out there a bit, but it was still very much in a controlled environment for the punters. It was a very, very commercial thing. So World War happened, that kind of happened. But there was a place called Minton's, which was where they were developing their bebop chops, and they were writing together and they were working out what to do, and they were writing this horrendously difficult music, and they were practicing in jam sessions 6 and 7 nights a week. So they'd finish their commercial gig and they'd take their bow tie off and they'd nip round to Minton's and play till 6 o'clock in the morning. And basically it was a burying match, which they used to refer to, which was, if you're going to get up and play, be prepared to die, and they would basically play as hard and fast and high as they could, and people would be sulking off and crying and crawling out to their car or their apartment and practicing for 4 months to come back so that they could try and survive for 2 choruses the next time. And it was that kind of environment, and they were building this melting pot where Be Bop was being born. But unreal coincidence, as well as the World War II thing, which meant they couldn't travel. So nobody was hearing this. Back to this pre-1920 thing where people were being socialised in the flesh by hearing the music in the flesh, because there was no recordings going on, because there was a shortage of shellac, so there was no vinyl made really. But there was also this massive AFM recording ban in America, which meant that no musicians were allowed to record. So there was a 2 or 3 year recording ban during the birth of Be Bop. So normally, whenever a jazz genre changes, you hear the warts and all before it's kind of perfected. Yeah. But people were singing along to wee ba doo ba doo ba doo ba doo da doo 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 da ba doo doo ya doo da, dancing along to it and singing along, thinking this is great, this is where jazz is. These are the best players now. Meantime, these guys were almost like they'd been abducted by aliens and injected with something and put back. They were playing like the tribe from planet Zarog, you know what I mean? They were gone. They were light years ahead of what was going on, but they were out playing Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, and then heading to Minton's and doing this demonic stuff, which was just horrifically hard. So whenever they actually got the band over and they started recording this stuff, it was 4 years in the making, and it was almost a shock of people hearing it. And some of the players who were older, who didn't know about this stuff, they were doing their own thing. They heard it and they said, this is ridiculous, because it was basically muscles. It was actually muscle men. It was almost like, be prepared to die, everybody. Yes. Your careers are now over. And some people kind of were alienated by the music and thought this is crazy, but these Be Boppers just lifted this enormous thing to an incredibly high level, and the records were coming out, and it was shock and awe. And Be Bop from that point then restructured everything. Now there was a really key moment, which I'm sure people can look up on the internet now, it was a little caller guy called Pee Wee Marquette.
Yes.
Pee Wee Marquette. Hi everybody! Clifford Brown. And he used to introduce the bands for the record. You're going to clap, you're going to hear your little hands on that little record, you know, so he was doing all this kind of stuff on the record. And then you'd hear the track. And one of them ones he introduced, I'm pretty sure it was I Remember April, which you guys would play. And it was Max Roach and Clifford Brown, and I can't remember who else was in the band, Beasts, like, you know. And they played this ridiculous version. There was people crying and everything, you know, because they knew their careers were over. You know what I mean? As you would. And Pee Wee Marquette said, and the band is going to play for their vehicle for improvisation. I Remember April. If we think about that,
Yeah.
you know, we think of music as a narrative, an expression of beautiful lines in a context. We think of the musical environment we're playing in and the respect for that. And of course, if we're thinking of a composition that we're
It's a
playing,
composition.
we're thinking of the composition tells us what to do. You know, and you know, you look at great players now, and you know they're world class, but they may be playing in a singer's band doing an original song they've sculpted, and they are on their best behaviour, not for the singer but for the song. The arrangement is, and you don't know, but they can play, you know, in B at 604 BPM, all this kind of mad stuff with all these substitutions, but they're doing because that's what the song requires. But here was Pee Wee Marquette correctly saying to the Be Boppers, and they're going to choose this song for the vehicle for improvisation. So let's get the head out of the way, lads. Quick, beep, and play to die, whoosh, bang, you know what I mean? And that's kind of what was going on. So jazz was never the same after that, and people took it to new levels. Now, there was nowhere to go with Be Bop, so after 4 or 5 years that was it, because they were just basically picking old tunes and bebopping them.
Yeah.
A bit like ragtime did, picking old tunes and ragging them, you know what I mean, 40 years before. But contemporary jazz and modern jazz then sort of took this new slant. There was a new language, there was this new vertical harmony where you were digging in. Now you could still superimpose blues aesthetic and things like that, but you were digging in, and the contemporary jazz has got more and more vertical, which is basically the domain of one chord at a time. Sweet Jesus, as I say, one chord at a time, sweet Jesus. So you're having that kind of, you know, domain, vertical domain, where the correct vertical language on the chord tones.
Much more precise in chord tones and particular accents.
But also then this thing of tension release, which has always been key to jazz, was now a much bigger thing. So you had this harmonic and rhythmic dissonance, which was deliberately created by the players. We think of big intervals, be do 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 da, be do do da, as much more dissonant than ba do 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 da. But there's a guy, if anybody's interested, Chris Potter, any Steely Dan fans, you know, one of the great sax players probably of all time, still very much alive and quite a young guy. And if you look at a book of Chris Potter, or you take time to transcribe some of his solos, as soon as you hear him, you think this guy's playing dissonance. He's playing notes that are outside the scale all the time. Wow, how does he do it? It's incredible. And of course, whenever you look at it, it's nearly all chord tones. It's almost all inside harmony, but these big flat 13 and 6 intervals that are big intervallic things that then are released. So all of this kind of stuff's been going on, and it becomes a study, which is really complicated. And I was a lyrical player, and I was happy. But whenever I got the light shone on by me, I guess by the PhD, the funding of the PhD to write and transcribe my stuff, I realised that although it was nice, and although people liked it, and although I probably played better in an awful lot of ways back then in terms of, you know, the meaning of what I was doing, I had a lot of work to do to improve tension methods, for example, you know, so angularity, intervallic patterns, substitution. So there's a thing called dominant harmony substitution, where you can substitute any dominant for an altered. So let's say you're playing a solo over C7, the band can still be playing C7, but you can superimpose you could put a C7 flat 5, or a C7 sharp 5, or a C7 altered, or a C7 flat 9 sharp 11. You could substitute that harmony for that, because that's the dominant function where you want the tension to be anyway. And you can superimpose that and play a sharp 11 or a flat 9 while you guys are just playing a C7. And then 2 bars later, whenever we're getting to some kind of tonic harmony, you can go back into the inside harmony again. And then you can do what we refer to as reinforcing the message, where you use a thing called dynamic contouring. And, you know, you can play louder in the tense moments and then release the tension with a lower dynamic.
So in terms of performance practice, that would be creating almost like we were talking about this earlier, a chamber music feel to a certain extent in regard to the actual level of dynamics that you use.
Well, it's really funny you should say that, because of course, if you ask an African American who's steeped in jazz, they will tell you that's their classical music.
Yeah.
So, I think you're right. I think, we listen to the level. Of course, anybody wants to listen to really good jazz, you can probably check out my radio show. But because I'm playing everything that's more or less from the last 10 years, so you're hearing the contemporary stuff out there, do you know what I mean? But there's no doubt about it, the standard and accuracy and all that kind of stuff is very, very high. Now, if we go back, there's a lot of people who are going to be listening to this who would be big Louis Armstrong fans. And if we go back to Louis Armstrong, we think of, for those of you who don't know, he was brought into King Oliver's band. And this was probably the most significant change that happened to jazz, because whenever he moved from New Orleans to Chicago and joined King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band, there were 2 cornets in the band. So the normal jazz thing we would have thought of was cornet, clarinet and trombone. Yeah. But the band had 2 cornets. King Oliver was fulfilling the role of the cornet. Johnny Dodds was filling the role of the clarinet very well. Can't remember who was in trombone for that one. Don't think it was Kid Ory.
I thought it was Kid Ory.
Not sure for that band. I'm not sure, but it might be. But either way, it was covered, guys. But King Oliver wanted Louis to be in the band because he saw this incredible thing. So Louis actually had to do something that wasn't quite the role of the cornet, wasn't quite the role of the clarinet or the trombone. So he had to kind of create his own thing. So he was playing these lines, which were very similar in construction to the stuff that Chet and those guys were doing 20 years later. So he'd kind of created this thing which, to put it nicely, made group improvisation a thing of the past.
Yeah.
And moved to the role of the soloist. So there's always been these things happening, these transitions, and there's still things happening. The big leaders of it now are Brad Meldau and Aaron Parks, really, the 2 pianists. They're changing the way jazz is happening, and they're changing the focus of it. And there's a great PhD just about to be published by Scott Flanagan, who is everybody's favourite pianist kind of around here, and Scott's going to be a doctor of jazz very soon, and he's done his basically on learning from Aaron Parks and Brad Meldau and how to use that learning to transform the modern player and obviously his own playing. So there's always been that kind of thing, but this thing you alluded to, this horizontal and vertical, I made that transition through the PhD, and I've done 2 albums since then, making other arrangements, which is an orchestral album, and For the Record, which is probably my most progressive one to date, and I'm booked to do another one the first week in May 2022, which will definitely be more progressive again, I think. So I'll probably lose an army of fans, but what can you do?
And then as you've talked about horizontal and vertical then, Roz, and excuse my potential naivety here, when you say vertical, are you playing vertical notes up and down arpeggios, or is that a misunderstanding?
Well, you see, it's a great question. So can I just say that the language is what you say it is? Am I just playing vertical notes up and down on the arpeggio? Because the arpeggio would be the chord tones, yes. So you can see why that would be. Well, if we think of the C major scale as C, D, E, F, G, A, B, we think of the vertical arpeggio as C, E, G, B, D, F, A, the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. Yeah. So there's an element of truth in what you're saying. What I would just say to you is you're thinking of the language as vertical. So you're thinking of 1, 3, 5, 7 or 1, 3, 5 flat 7, let's say, dominant, 9, 11, 13. So you're thinking of that language. And then you're thinking of what notes are outside that scale that can give you tension options. So you're not just playing arpeggios, but what you are doing, this is the difference between lyrical horizontal playing, and which I try and still have in my playing, by the way, and the vertical angular playing. What you will hear with the contemporary players is this thing called motif or motivic development. So you're right, let's say it's only a bar. Now, a lot of the stuff, like if you listen to Kenny Garrett did an album called Simply Said. I strongly recommend you listen to that if you want to hear something that's really lyrical from a vertical player. And what you'll find is they'll do 4 bars of D, which is kind of the modal stuff that Davis did in Kind of Blue, and how the fusion stuff goes. So you'll hear tonal centers again, okay? But you won't hear the tonal center because they're superimposing new harmony. But to get back to your answer, so you have those arpeggios, right? So let's say instead of me doing bo bo do do dee do 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 da, I do bo bo deep, okay, which is a motif. Do do dee do do dee do ba dee deep. So let's say we've got 4 different chord changes happening 4 bars in a row. Well, we can just play that motif through those. Bo-bo-dee, 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 bo-bo-dee. Or we can rhythmically displace it. Bo-bo-dee, bo-bo-dee-doo, bo-dee-doo, bo-dee. Or bo-bo-dee-doo, bo-dee-doo, bo-dee-doo. So we're rhythmically moving it. Or we can extend it. Bo-bo-dee, bo-bo-doo-dee-doo, bo-bo-doo-dee-doo-doo-doo. Or reduce it. Bo-bo-dee, bo-bo-doo-dee, bo-bo-bo-bo-dee-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. And we can have play intervallically. We can change it from, as you're a guitar player, you can change it and think of what I'm going to change that note from what the bottom one is in the. So instead of playing the root in the bottom, I'm going to play the third in the bottom. We're going to play the seventh. You can invert it instead of doing bo-bo-dee. You can do bo-bo-doo, 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 bo-bo-doo. You can substitute a triad pair, which is a technical device, which actually is a formula for creating tension and releasing it. It's actually a formula. You just learn these formula, but you can alter it into your own thing. But the goal for all musicians is not to prepare something that's going to sound the same every time. The goal for all musicians is to automate the process. So now that you know that the language exists, now that you know that you have these grammar devices, which allows you to create tension and release it, now that you know that you kind of need a straight tone, but you can use vibrato in ballads and things and that, now you know that to make the capacity sound bigger, you need a bigger range, faster tongue, and the ability to play these angular things really, really quickly. Now that you know those, then you're still looking to have a target end point of what you want to hear, because maybe listening, like I'm listening to people like maybe Charlie Porter, modern New York players, or Jared Presenter, who's my teacher. So I would listen to those guys and think, okay, I want to sound like that. And because of my years of playing and listening, I can then audio visualize me sounding like me playing with their language. And then I have to design a methodology to get me to do that. So some of it will be exercises to get my tongue going, some of it will be exercises to get the flexibility going, some of it will be harmonic language and trying these nasty technical patterns with a metronome. So I have all that stuff in my fingers at that speed. So if I choose to, I can play very fast, very high, very angular, or whatever. So I've got the methodology, I've got the process in terms of how I practice, and I want to talk. It's very important. You remind me, because I'm starting to lose it. Remind me to talk about the process in terms of marginal gains. Remind me to say that. So basically, then you'll have the process, which is designing different practice things to, and some of those practice things are listening, by the way. Some of them are transcription, and a lot of them are on the horn. So you're designing these different practice things to come up with solutions that allow you to make an incremental change in these different things. And eventually, as you combine this practice with gigging and trying things out, eventually you find a transition. You find a transition where the process becomes more automated, and just by thinking, you can play what we used to do, which is a solo which your ear is telling you to do. You know, and you're playing it, but it's actually been something pretty nasty that you've had to work out, that nobody knows you've done that work, and you just walk in and you say, hi everybody, I'm going to take a trump out and I'm going to bury it, you know what I mean? Because all that stuff's happened actually in the past in the bedroom, and you've been crying and your wife said, don't give up a trumpet, you'll be fine. And they said, no, I'm going to sell it, I'm going to bring it. But you've gone through all that stuff until eventually you're starting to automate the process. And then whenever you automate the process, you're automating it at a higher level. You know, that's a wrong thing to say. You're automating it using a more complex language than you have. Now, I'm saying that, And yet, whenever I'm reading, I'm not wanting to read academic books. I'm a lecturer in university. The last thing I want to do in my downtime is read an academic book. You know, my wife say, "Why don't you pick up that one on the sophisticated crushing of the dominant ninth and the thing?" And I say, "Well, is there not one on donkey care? You know, I'd read one on donkey care. I'd rather read one on donkey care. That'd be more valuable to us. You know what I mean? Or planting potatoes in March. You know."
What I take from that, even at a basic level, is that. And we're coming near the end. There's one thing I want to remind you of, which is marginal gains.
Yeah.
But just if I can mention this, that the acquisition of a jazz vocabulary as such is not something which you're going to pick up by osmosis. You really do have to listen. You really do have to decide, I would like to play in a particular style or styles. Listen to players who are doing that and try and work at it. Because it's not something which somebody's going to sit you down and say, this is the magic formula.
I agree, but you see, what's wrong with that? Because
there's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
The way I look at it is, if you were going to try and learn French,
absolutely.
You know, a lot of parents will take their kids to Paris or to Nice or whatever to hang out in a wee country residence, and they hire for 6 weeks, and they send him to a guy going, I can't speak French, you know what I mean, but whatever it is, and they'll be talking to the lady bringing the milk walking past, and you know, I can't think of any, see if you play, whatever it is, you know, and they'll be listening, and they're listening to the dialect, and they're listening to the phrasing, and then they get that thing. Well, music is a language, so of course you're going to be doing it. It's got vocabulary and grammar, but you obviously have to learn the vocabulary, you know. So I mean, I love to use this example of Brexit and what's the other word? COVID-19. I'm sure you've all heard of COVID-19 and Brexit. Nobody had heard of COVID-19 or Brexit 4 years ago.
Yes.
Nobody had heard of it. But now everybody uses it, and they joke about it, and they use it as a noun, as an adjective, and all that kind of thing, and everybody knows what it's about and things like that. We've had to bring that into our language. We've been listening to political shows, we've been listening to doctors and news writers, and it's all around us now, and it's just a natural thing for it. We'll always be able to know what it means. So if you're learning how to use triad pairs, which is nasty, I have to say, it's not for everybody, it's not even for me, actually. But if you're learning to use something like that, or altered dominance and things like that, and you think, bloody hell.
Well, how does the marginal gains aspect, and we wind up with that, play into sort of
I think marginal gains,
acquiring that facility?
I think marginal gains is the greatest gift to musicians, especially ones that I'm targeting by this, because I'm targeting your peripatetic music teachers and your kids who've got grade 7 or 8 in the amateur orchestras and all that kind of thing. And people say to me, well, I'm a violinist, so I can't play jazz. Well, one of my favourite ever jazz musicians is a violinist, Jean-Luc Ponty, and one of the best females, and one of the best female violinists, one of the best jazz violinists is a female, Regina Carter. So they're, you know, get your stuff into them. Violin's where it's at, baby, if you want to play jazz, you know what I mean? So, you know, the marginal gains thing is that these guys have already got high level skills as musicians, high level, much higher than me. I can't do what they do. So accurate every time, delivery, fabulous tone, intonation and pitching, knowledge of scales. I mean, they have all the hard stuff down. So marginal gains is about identifying a way to make an incremental improvement on your instrument. So let's say you're a trumpet player like me, so you need to be working on tone. You need to be working on sound production and breathing. You need to be working on vibrato and how to introduce it at different rates and how not to, or more importantly for me, for the stuff I play, how not to use it. You need to be looking on the vertical language in terms of ability to play complex harmony fast, like, you know, maybe over a G9 sharp 11 flat 13 or something. So whenever you see that, or Lydian, some kind of Lydian thing, you know, you're not afraid. It's just like everything else, because you've tackled in the whatever it is, the bedroom, all that stuff that needs to be done. And you know, you can actually break it down into, for me, at the moment, I've broken it down into about 14 specific things that I'm now currently working on. I'm kind of happy with what I'm doing and other things, but these are the 14 things. One of the big things for me now is to change my articulation until I die, so that I will not have to contort my face to play quickly anymore or high. So I'm working on things like that. And to not have a pivot, you know, because sometimes I'd be lazy and I'd develop this pivot where I'd almost take the my face off the mouthpiece if I'm going into a higher register or lower. So I'm kind of eradicating that now with stuff I'm doing. So I've divided, like we talked about earlier, I've identified where I want to be and what I need to do to get there. I've designed a methodology. I've designed a practice process. So I can really get into a rigorous area of research or practice, or maybe designing 10 different exercises for range, or for doing intervals of a flat 9 on any note, up and down, all that kind of stuff, and accurately pitching them while pushing my range up and trying to keep my diaphragm under control. So that's just like 7 or 8 exercises just for one thing. So if I can make a marginal gain in that one thing of like improving myself by 5% over a 3-month period, and I do that over 14 things, then there's a cumulative effect as I move towards my target. So marginal gains is a sporting thing that's been brought into music. There's another thing that's been brought into music from sport called audio visualization. And we are very much in this period of audio visualization where you're watching people do stuff on Facebook, and if they've just cleaned the spuds or washed the car and to go on, people switch off straight away because they have to be able to smile and talk to people, and they have to be able to present themselves and probably dress appropriately as respect for the music, So you have to present that visual thing. Now, one of the big things in sport is that you think about audio visualization. So if let's say you're rowing and you're racing these 8s or 4s, you're thinking, okay, this crew might be half a length faster than us with 500 meters to go. So we have to think that we have to push the rate up by 3 strokes. We have to increase the length. We have to pile the pressure on, and 3 strokes before the line, we'll just be rowing through them and accelerating. So they live that, their body lives that experience. And then whenever they're in the race, they've already had that experience. And you're doing the same with music. So if you're wanting to play saxophone like Michael Brecker, you're hearing Brecker, you're hearing yourself playing like Brecker, you're doing the practice and methodology and process to give yourself the technique in those different levels, you're pushing out the range, you're approaching a tone similar to him, the way he bends or the way he plays straight or whatever, and you're audio visualizing yourself playing in that kind of thing, and you have done it by the time you get on the stage. It's just a question of you getting practice to do it and to get back
I
yourself.
think we'll probably have to wind it up there.
Unfortunately, we do.
It's been fascinating, informative, and entertaining.
Thank you.
So we're delighted to have had you here.
And we'll do it again.
We will do it again.
Well, everybody just keep listening to jazz wherever you are. From me, Linley Hamilton. Good night.
Thank you.